Emily and I just played, and by that I mean recently just played, SETI. This is a new one from CGE. We played it the other night, so this is actually not a game in progress. This is actually the setup of the game.
Because we're going to play right after this.
I don't know if we're going to do that. We got other games to play, but we want to play this because, spoiler alert, we both
really
like it a lot.
Yes.
And in fact, Emily likes it so much that we're going to take a day, collect our thoughts, record. We took 2 days, and she's played 2 more times.
2 more times.
Because she took the game.
People. Yes,
she took the game, so I couldn't play it again. But we've got it set up here, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at. We've got the solar system board here, which is where a lot of the action is going to take place. We're going to be launching probes from the middle here, moving those probes out throughout the solar system. We're going to be scanning different sectors. We're also going to be potentially taking those probes, as you can see, to various planets. And if we orbit or land on them, those will go over here. All of these things are going to score us some points, get us some bonuses, but all of it is in the interest of finding alien traces or trace evidence of alien life because the game is called SETI.
Yes, so what we're really doing is we're going to have 2 aliens out here. There's 5 to begin with in the box, and you're randomly going to put out 2. The main goal we're trying to get to is we're trying to get these pink, yellow, and blue alien traces about life. And when we do that, we get to actually mark them with our own little thing. Once we've marked all 3 for an alien species, we get to reveal. And then actually flip it over. There's going to be a bunch more stuff to do. They each come with their own, usually their own deck, sometimes their own components, and a whole bunch more. It's like the new part of the game comes alive when you reveal the 2 alien species.
And we have played games that do something similar along those lines, but I gotta tell you, it's been a long time since there's been such a situation where it feels like such a new scenario for the game, because you're sitting there, you're playing, you know that you're supposed to be collecting traces, and that doesn't really stop. You want to continue collecting traces of those alien life to kind of interact with them and operate on their boards to obviously score points, but those boards are going to behave very differently from one another. And like Emily said, all of them have decks of cards, and you're going to get some of those cards. All those cards work completely different from one another. A lot of them are going to put little tokens out along the score track that will trigger. And when you get the alien, everyone's going to put one like such a distance from their current score position. And once they get there, they're able to go to do a thing. So it's really interesting, and it really brings the whole theme together. And this designer, Tomas Holek, did also Galilei.
Yes, which is very cool. The same year. And he also did a third one, right?
Tea Garden. All 3 of these games came out at Essen.
Crazy.
This and Galilei are interesting because thematically they have some common threads. You know, that one is kind of the origins of looking up to the stars. And this is more current in terms of actually reaching all the way out to alien life. But again, it has to do with the solar system. There's some rotating also going on.
But at its core, what we're really doing here is we're doing action selection. So on your turn, you're just going to choose one main action, unlimited free actions, but there's not too many to keep track of. And then you are just going to go to the next person. Keep going back and forth until we pass. We're going to do it over 5 years, and that's going to be it. The main actions are going to be, like you said, putting out a probe. We always start at Earth, and that is just the main action. You put out a probe.
That is one of the main actions that your turn is done.
Yes. You could do a free action to spend an energy to move somewhere in the solar system. There's some things with movements, like when you move on a planet, you'll get some publicity. When you move through asteroids, they're like rocky terrain. They're hard to leave. Or you can even discard cards. So the cards are a big part of this play too. A lot of the cards have on their corner, you can discard them for movement. So that's another way to move around the solar system. The next action you can take is that you can actually get that probe and put it on a planet. So if this is now at Venus, I can land this probe on Venus itself, or I can have it orbiting Venus. The first person to do it is going to get some extra bonuses. So you always want to be first to it. But anybody who does this and you have unlimited spots can get the actual rewards from it. So either 6 points and an income, or if you land on it, 5 points in a trace. Those were the traces we were talking about. That's one of the main ways to get the traces in the game, is the yellow traces are when you land on planets. So that's one way to kind of the main thing of victory here.
And another thing you can do on your turn, one of the main actions is to scan. Scanning is going to lead more often than not to pink traces. When you scan, you're going to potentially do multiple scans, but at the beginning of the game, you're going to be doing 2. the first scan you're going to do is from Earth. So you're always going to look where Earth is and look at that sector. And if I scanned right now, I would necessarily be scanning here. When you do that, you're going to take one of these pieces of data. You're going to bring it to your player board. More on that in a second. And you're going to replace that data with one of your pieces. And as you can imagine, this is going to ultimately fill up. And it will ultimately be an area majority situation where this kind of gets reset. And the person who wins it is going to put their piece here, score 5 points, and get a trace. You know, this is where you're going to potentially get those pink traces. And like Emily said at the beginning, we want those traces early on to open up those aliens.
Yes.
And then also to interact with them, because that's where really some of the big points come into play.
Yeah. I think two things that are interesting with the scans are that the second person who puts their scan out is actually the one who's going to get 2 points. So it's a very cool little thing with timing. Also, whenever we resolve them, it'll be at the end of a turn when it's Phil, and we'll see who got second place. That person will get to keep one of their scans in here, so it's seeded for the next time. And then you can keep getting majorities and majorities. So if you're playing in a 4-person game, even if you don't win it one time, you're like, oh, I was so close, you still get seeded for the next one. And so then hopefully you can get it the next time around. And there are ways to upgrade this so that you're doing even more scanning on the same turn.
Yeah, we'll talk about upgrades in a second. But yeah, you can do a ton of scanning. If you upgrade a lot, when you scan, you're like, I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this.
Yes.
And that's one way you can kind of interact with this and say, okay, I'll scan from Earth. Oh, and then I can scan this other way. It allows me to scan the same sector and get the second spot right away to get those 2 points. Not to mention 2 of the 4 spaces in this majority.
Exactly. And a lot of them have to do with the cards again. So like the second way you're scanning that you're starting with is you are looking at the row of 3 cards that are face up. And in the top right corner, there's going to be a color of scan. So we have yellow, black, and blue out here right now. I can choose any of those. If I chose the black one, I can scan it then either of the black sectors. So I could do the same one I just did and get those 2 points. Yep. Probably pretty smart. Or I could do the other one and just leave those 2 points all up for grabs for later.
I don't know how smart that is, but you might want to jump on some of these just to sort of shirt tail onto some of that area majority.
Yes, exactly.
Because like Emily said, even if you don't win, you might be seeded for the next
round. Plus,
round.
everyone's still going to get publicity for actually doing something there. But when you get this data, it's going to go onto your player board, and it's a free action, again, to actually move them onto the different spaces across the bottom. You want to do that because the next action you could take to get those blue traces is you can analyze your data. When you have all 6 of them, you'll pay an energy, you get a blue trace. So you get yellow traces from planets, pink traces from scanning, blue traces from data, and that's how you get the aliens.
That's how you get the traces. And the game will build in that respect because early on, you're going to have limited amount of resources. And in fact, throughout the game, you're going to feel like you have limited amount of resources.
For sure.
It should be said, this is one of those games where you get resources between rounds, and your round is dictated by making the most of those resources. Now, with that said, like we mentioned, there are multi-use cards. You're able to get a little bit more out of these. There's also some trade-offs. You can like trade, I think, 2 cards for just any
2
one.
resources for one other resource.
Yeah, so you can kind of find unique ways. One of the most unique ways you can find different routes to making things happen are the actual cards and playing the cards.
Yes. So a main action you can take is you can play a card on your turn. When you play a card, it's going to cost some amount of currency, and then it's going to give you some kind of action or some kind of big thing. For example, this card that I have here is going to give me a data, so just a data for free. It's going to spin the solar system, and it's going to give me a tech, a blue tech. So the last thing we haven't talked about yet is that you can use your publicity you're getting to get technologies, or you could just find a card that gives you a technology for three money. When you do this, you're going to spend up to 6 publicity and also rotate the solar system. The techs are the main way that the solar system is going to be moving, which is quite cool, really, because the first time you do it, it's going to do the innermost move. The second time, it's going to do the middle one. And the third time, it's going to do all 3 of them. And I was really impressed, actually, with how well this works.
Oh, yeah. In terms of physically?
Yes, physically. Like, it's not like they don't move too much. It looks
They don't push each other, except the right ones push the right ones.
Yes.
Because of, gravity.
But it has a cool system, too, because, like, if I have a probe here and then we're going to rotate and move into this, then my probe moves. It gets moved around the solar system, which is pretty cool. The other thing that when you're getting the upgrades, you're actually getting new techs. So there are new techs that are helping you with probes and putting them on planets. There are new techs that are helping you with signals and scanning the sky. And there are new probes, there are new techs that are helping you with data and getting more currency and more different things you can use throughout the round while you put that data down.
Yeah, all of these upgrades really just help you do what you do in the game. I think the only other thing I'd add to that is the orange ones that are about the probes. Those effectively let you break some rules.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them are like, you can normally do it this way, but if you have this upgrade, it costs less. The scanning is mostly all about just enhancing the amount of scanning that you're going to do.
Yes.
And all of those upgrades allow you to scan in a number of different ways. I think the last upgrade has nothing to do with scanning.
Yeah, it's more about tying it with the probes because then you get to launch a probe for cheaper or get a movement.
Yeah, but if you've upgraded all of your scans, when you scan, everyone else is going to be jealous of what you're doing because you're going to scan like 4 times.
Yes.
And you're going to be looking at the cards out here. You're going to be looking at cards in your hands. You're going to be looking where Earth is. And you're getting a lot of potential majority.
Yes.
And there are some instances where if you have the right cards in your hand, the right cards here, and Earth is in the right spot, you can scan, potentially in the same sector, getting 3 of those spaces. That might, A, give you majority, but B, it might really help you just finish one of those things off so that you can score at the end of your turn.
Yeah, and like you were saying, this game is really about like limited resources and then stretching those out in the best way possible. So the cards are going to give you a lot of flexibility to do things differently than you might have otherwise. Also, the variability of when the aliens come out, which aliens come out, how they're going to interact with the board. Plus, we have some endgame scoring, and there are 4 of them that come out each game. They're double-sided, but the combinations of them really does make a difference in what you're going to end up going for throughout the game. I was playing one and I was going for landing on moons a lot, but I didn't do any scanning, and that ended up really hurting me in scoring because the scoring was for who could do both of them the most. So it felt very variable from game to game, even though we're doing the same things, how you're actually making use of the cards you get when you get them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to get different cards. Well, like Emily said, those endgame scoring tiles, you definitely have to pay attention. If you played one way one game and those tiles are flipped a different way the next, you've got to really pay attention. You played another game where you didn't launch one probe.
I didn't launch a single probe that game.
Which is, she told me that. It sounds crazy. But she was spending her time just scanning. Obviously, I assume you upgraded this.
Yes, I did. Very much so.
You're able to scan a ton and get a lot of those traces. Now, you might not have been getting a lot. Well, you weren't getting any yellow traces, probably.
I was, though, because I was getting it from cards. Exactly. So that's where the cards, they really add a whole new dimension to this. And the one action we didn't talk about is that if you don't want to do anything else, you can keep taking free actions. You can pass on your turn. And when you pass, that's also going to orbit the solar system, and you're going to get to choose a card. There's always going to be player count +1, and you'll get to choose from there. So you have a little bit of options of like, okay, what am I trying to get done? Honestly, though, looking at these cards, they always tempt me to kind of change my route that I'm going.
Oh, for sure. These cards definitely dangle some carrots. They also, you're going to want to look at them thoroughly, and you don't get a lot of cards, right? No. So we start with, like 5 cards in our hand?
And we tuck 1 to begin with.
And you tuck one of those, so you're going to have 4. And when you tuck, that is how you get production ultimately. So there's just a few of opportunities to do that in the game. One of them is if you collect data, one of the spots you're going to put the data on will allow you to tuck one of your cards. I found that you wanted to tuck, it's very satisfying to tuck a lot of those cards, because when production comes around and you're like, oh, I'm getting 5 money and 4 energy, and people are like, wait, how are you? And it just sets you up for a much more satisfying round. So production is really interesting, not to mention some of those endgame scoring tiles will encourage you to form your production in certain ways. You might want to get a lot of energy cards tucked, or a lot of credits, or a nice mix of all 3.
Exactly. And the other way that you can actually tuck them is going through the sky when you're putting orbits down. So you're really, again, what I love about this game is that you're forced to kind of do a little bit of everything. Like you said, though, I had that one game where I didn't launch any probes. So it's really allowing you to say, like, which way do you want to take as a path to victory? Right. One thing I will say is we've only played it 2-player, and I feel this game is going to be very different at a higher player count.
Yeah, I think it will play a lot differently. Now, with that said, we've enjoyed it quite a lot at 2 players. Now, I've just only played it the one time. You've played it 3 times now at 2 players. I can only imagine it being better at 4 players. I do think with all of the potential that you have to look at your cards and go, oh, how can I get these things done? For some players, it might slow it down. A 4-player game of this is probably going to take a minute.
Yeah.
But in our two-player, how was your last two-player game? Did it go pretty quick?
It was very fast.
Because our first one, it was a learning game, so it took a little longer. But I think if Emily and I played it again, we could knock this out pretty quickly.
Yes,
What the box says, 40 minutes?
40 minutes per player.
And I think two experienced players playing a two-player could probably even get that down a little
I believe
bit.
that too.
It does ramp, and the first few rounds felt very quick because you don't have any resources or very little.
You've set up very little. Like it's a new board.
You've set up very little. But I'd say it's in the third of the 5 rounds that it starts to pivot and feel like, oh, now we're getting a lot more done.
Yes.
But even in the third round, not as much as in the fourth and the fifth.
Yes.
The fourth and the fifth feels like, okay, now we can do a lot of... Well, they're very rewarding. You're getting a lot of points throughout the game. I will say that. Your point marker is going to move. But when the aliens come out, you can make some really big moves. Like in the game we played, I had a turn where I jumped like 20-some points.
Yeah, I think even more than that, because I think you had 2 that were 15-pointers. So you did like 30 points plus whatever you were getting for the things you were actually doing on your turn. It was crazy. And you can have big turns like that, right? Like as long as you can string these things out, it's very clever the way this is put together because the currencies you're using for playing cards, for getting things out, for doing the main actions are not the same currencies you're getting if you do the free actions, like discarding cards. So you're always looking for little ways to be like, how do I make this one currency a different currency? Because that's what I need to do this one action that will finally get me the thing I want.
Yeah, the other cool thing about the score track and how that works is I felt motivated not just by the score itself, but by some of those things that were happening on the score track. In a two-player game, for example, the first thing is there's this sort of neutral player that has markers at 20 and 30. When one of us passes that, in fact, when either of us pass it, one of these markers comes out here to help flip those aliens. Now, once both aliens are flipped, these markers don't do anything, but it does help make the game, sort of the pace work. But when those aliens come out, at least the 2 that we had, they're putting things out on the board.
Yes.
Sometimes it's unique to you. Sometimes it's for everyone.
Yes.
And we, one of them gave us some unique cards that weren't really part of our hand. And there were points around the board at which we could actually choose, if we wanted to play one of those cards face down. And it would give us some potential end of game scoring, but also a potential penalty. There was like a bit of a risk reward.
It's very unique.
And the score track itself has these parts that allow you to interact in the end game scoring because those tiles, you have to kind of claim them. So when someone passes the 25 mark, if you're the first player, you get your first pick of whatever of these scoring tiles you think you're going to score. Not only that, but you're going to be able to take the first spot, which is going to net you the most points for that particular type of scoring.
And that can be huge because the difference between the 11 and 8 points, if we both get 3 sets, that's a big difference there, right?
Yeah.
So you really want to say like, okay, maybe I should just like race to some early points right at the beginning so that way I can put my markers out there. Or you could say like, I'm going to take my time a little bit here. I'm going to slow roll it at first just so I can make sure I have them on the right things since I'm only going to get to claim 3 out of the 4 in the full game and then choose the ones that are really going to benefit my strategy.
Yeah, that is really important because if you run up to 25 too fast and you've not really set yourself up, you're pretty much throwing a dart and going, well, I guess I'll do this one because I'm closest to it. Optimally, you have at least one of those.
Really
like,
well.
If you could go here knowing I've got 11 points already,
good.
instead of like I hope to get 11, maybe 22, that's maybe not the thing to do. Yeah, and again, the last thing I wanted to mention is the theme. The theme for me really feels like it's there all throughout. At first, before you flip those aliens, you get what you're doing, and you're like sort of searching the night skies, you're scanning things. It feels very thematic. You're literally launching probes and moving them around. All those sorts of things in a Euro game like this help make you feel like you're doing the things that you're thematically doing. But I'll tell you, when those aliens flip, then it really feels like, oh, wow, this really, not just theme, but it just adds this dash of, I wouldn't even say narrative, but it kind of feels like there's these events happening. And these events have flavor. And not only flavor, but they have like not thematic and mechanical impact on the game to where you're like, oh, really? Oh, now I'm going to do this. And you might actually, it really defines how you're going to play the rest of the game.
And I would say, again, that adds to the variability because no 2 games are going to be the same. Even though in the first 2 games I played with you and with my friend, we got the same 2 aliens.
That's crazy.
just by random chance. But we got them at different times. And also, like, they switched the order, but also very different times in the game. So, like, when we played ours, I think we didn't get our second alien out until maybe the third, maybe even the fourth.
It was
round.
later.
It was very late. But in my game with my other friend, we got it out, I think, the first round. Honestly, it was very, very quick. And so it made a huge difference on like how likely people were to use it, to interact with it, and to interact with that part of like the story especially.
Yeah, it is a really interesting game. This is SETI. We're really glad we played it because we're about to put together our top 10 list for the year. And spoiler alert, I'm guessing this one's going to be on at least both of our top 10 lists. But stay tuned for that and be sure to watch that. But yeah, if you have any questions about this one at all, please make them in the comments below. And of course, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table.